He is said to have smothered guests at a banquet by flooding the room with rose petals, married his male lover who Wason referred as the Empress's husband, and married one of the Vestal Virgins. Some say he was transgender, and one ancient text states that he offered half the empire to the physician who could give him female genitalia. The running of the empire during this time was mainly left to his grandmother and mother, Julia Soaemias. Seeing that her grandson's outrageous behavior could mean the loss of power, Julia Marsa persuaded Elagabalus to accept his cousin Severus Alexander as Caesar, and thus the nominal emperor to be. However, Alexander was popular with the troops, who viewed their new emperor with dislike, when Elagabalus, jealous of this popularity, removed the title of Caesar from his nephew. The enraged Praetorian Guard swore to protect him. Elagabalus and his mother were murdered in a Praetorian Guard camp mutiny. Severus Alexander, 222–235. Bust of Severus Alexander, the last emperor of the Severan dynasty, Muses and Raymond. Toulouse. Severus Alexander was adopted as son and Caesar by his slightly older and very unpopular cousin, the Emperor Elagabalus, at the urging of the influential and powerful Julia Marsa, who was grandmother of both cousins and who had arranged for the emperor's acclamation by the Third Legion. On March 6, 222, when Alexander was just 14, a rumor went around the city troops that Alexander had been killed, triggering a revolt of the guards that had sworn his safety from Elagabalus and high succession as emperor. The 18-year-old Emperor Elagabalus and his mother were both taken from the palace, dragged through the streets, murdered and thrown in the river Tiber by the Praetorian Guard, who then proclaimed Severus Alexander as Augustus. Ruling from the age of 14 under the influence of his able mother Julia of Ptolemais, Alexander restored, to some extent, the moderation that characterized the rule of Septimius Severus. The rising strength of the Sasanian Empire, 226–651, heralded perhaps the greatest external challenge that Rome faced in the 3rd century. His prosecution of the war against a German invasion of Gaul led to his overthrow by the troops he was leading, whose regard the 27-year-old had lost during the campaign. 235–284, crisis of the 3rd century. The situation of the Roman Empire became dire in AD 235, when the Emperor Severus Alexander was murdered by his own troops. Many Roman legions had been defeated during a campaign against Germanic peoples raiding across the borders, while the emperor was focused primarily on the dangers from the Sassanid Persian Empire. Leading his troops personally, Alexander resorted to diplomacy and the paying of tribute in an attempt to pacify the Germanic chieftains quickly. According to Herodian, this cost him the respect of his troops, who may have felt they should be punishing the tribes who were intruding on Rome's territory. 74. In the years following the emperor's death, generals of the Roman army fought each other for control of the empire and neglected their duties in preventing invasions. Provincials became victims of frequent raids by foreign tribes, such as the Carpians, Goths, Vandals, and Alemanni, along the Rhine and Danube rivers in the western part of the empire, as well as attacks from Sassanids in the eastern part of the empire. Additionally, in 251, the plague of Cyprian, possibly smallpox, broke out, causing large-scale mortality which may have seriously affected the ability of the empire to defend itself. An Antoninianus coin depicting Zenobia showing her diadem and draped bust on a crescent with the reverse showing a standing figure of Iano Regina. By 258, the Roman Empire broke up into 3 competing states. The Roman provinces of Gaul, Britain and Hispania broke off to form the Gallic Empire, and, 2 years later in 260, the eastern provinces of Syria. Palestine and Egypt became independent as the Palmyrene Empire, leaving the remaining Italian-centered Roman Empire proper in their middle. An invasion by a vast host of Goths was beaten back at the Battle of Naissus in 269. This victory was significant as the turning point of the crisis, when a series of tough, energetic Sogdian emperors took power. Victories by the Emperor Claudius Gothicus over the next 2 years drove back the Alemanni and recovered Hispania from the Gallic Empire. When Claudius died in 270 of the plague, Aurelian, who had commanded the cavalry at Naissus, succeeded him as the emperor and continued the restoration of the empire. Aurelian reigned 270-275 through the worst of the crisis, defeating the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Palmyrans, the Persians, and then the remainder of the Gallic Empire. By late 274, the Roman Empire was reunited into a single entity, and the frontier troops were back in place. More than a century would pass before Rome again lost military ascendancy over its external enemies. However, dozens of formerly thriving cities, especially in the Western Empire, had been ruined, their populations dispersed and, with the breakdown of the economic system, could not be rebuilt. Major cities and towns, even Rome itself, had not needed fortifications for many centuries. Many then surrounded themselves with thick walls. Finally, although Aurelian had played a significant role in restoring the empire's borders from external threat, more fundamental problems remained. In particular, the right of succession had never been clearly defined in the Roman Empire, leading to continuous civil wars as competing factions in the military, senate and other parties put forward their favored candidate for emperor. Another issue was the sheer size of the empire, which made it difficult for a single autocratic ruler to effectively manage multiple threats at the same time. These continuing problems would be radically addressed by Diocletian, allowing the empire to continue to survive in the West for over a century and in the East for over a millennium. Late Roman Empire. As a matter of historical convention, the late Roman Empire emerged from the Principate, the early Roman Empire, with the accession of Diocletian in 284, following the 3rd century crisis of AD 235-284. 75-11. The end of the late Empire is usually marked in the West with the collapse of the Western Empire in AD 476, while in the East its end is disputed, as either occurring at the close of the reign of Justinian I, AD 565-76, or of Heraclius, AD 641. 77. The subsequent period of centuries of the Roman Empire's history is conventionally labeled the Byzantine Empire, with the reign of Heraclius beginning the Middle Byzantine period, which lasted until the Fourth Crusade. 284-301, Diocletian and the Tetrarchy. The Tetrarchs, a porphyry sculpture sacked from a Byzantine palace in 1204 treasury of Street, marks Venice. The transition to divided western and eastern halves of the empire was gradual. In July 285, Diocletian defeated rival Emperor Carinus and briefly became sole emperor of the Roman Empire. Diocletian's reign stabilized the empire and marked the end of the crisis of the 3rd century. Diocletian appointed a co-emperor in 286 and delegated further with 2 junior emperors. Diocletian secured the empire's borders and purged it of all threats to his power. He defeated the Sarmatians and Carpi during several campaigns between 285 and 299. The Alemanni in 288, and usurpers in Egypt between 297 and 298. Gallerus, aided by Diocletian, campaigned successfully against Sassanid Persia, the empire's traditional enemy. In 299, he sacked the capital, Ctesiphon. Diocletian led the subsequent negotiations and achieved a lasting and favorable peace. Diocletian separated and enlarged empire's civil and military services and reorganized the empire's provincial divisions, establishing the largest and most bureaucratic government in the history of the empire. He established new administrative centers in Nicomedia, Mediolanum, Antioch, and Trier, closer to the empire's frontiers than the traditional capital at Rome had been. Building on 3rd century trends towards absolutism, he styled himself an autocrat, elevating himself above the empire's masses with imposing forms of court ceremonies and architecture. Bureaucratic and military growth, constant campaigning, and construction projects increased the state's expenditures and necessitated a comprehensive tax reform. From at least 297 on, imperial taxation was standardized, made more equitable, and levied at generally higher rates. Diocletian saw that the vast Roman Empire was ungovernable by a single emperor in the face of internal pressures and military threats on two fronts. He therefore split the empire in half along a northwest axis just east of Italy, and created two equal emperors to rule under the title of Augustus. Diocletian himself was the Augustus of the eastern half, and he made his longtime friend Maximian Augustus of the western half. In doing so, he effectively created what would become the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. On the 1st of March 293, authority was further divided. Each Augustus took a junior emperor called a Caesar to aim in administrative matters, and to provide a line of succession. Gallus became Caesar for Diocletian and Constantius Chlorus Caesar for Maximian. This constituted what is called the Tetrarchy by modern scholars, as each emperor would rule over a quarter division of the empire. After the empire had been plagued by bloody disputes about the supreme authority, this finally formalized a peaceful succession of theocra. In each half a Caesar would rise up to replace the Augustus and select a new Caesar. On May 1305, Diocletian and Maximian abdicated in favor of their Caesars. Gallus named the two new Caesars his nephew Maximinus for himself, and Valerius Severus for Constantius. The arrangement worked well under Diocletian and Maximian and shortly thereafter. The internal tensions within the Roman government were less acute than they had been. In the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon notes that this arrangement worked well because of the affinity the four rulers had for each other. Gibbon says that this arrangement has been compared to a chorus of music. With the retirement of Diocletian and Maximian, this harmony disappeared. Map of the Roman Empire under the Tetrarchy showing the dioceses and the four tetrarchs' zones of influence after an initial period of tolerance. Diocletian, who was a fervent pagan and was worried about the ever-increasing numbers of Christians in the empire, persecuted them with zeal unknown since the time of Nero. This was to be one of the greatest persecutions Christians endured in history. Not all of Diocletian's plans were successful. The Edict on Maximum Prices, 301, his attempt to curb inflation via price controls, was counterproductive and quickly ignored. Although effective while he ruled, Diocletian's tetrarchic system collapsed after his abdication under the competing dynastic claims of Maxentius and Constantine, sons of Maximian and Constantius respectively. The Diocletianic persecution, 311, the empire's last, largest, and bloodiest official persecution of Christianity, did not destroy the empire's Christian community. Indeed, after 324 Christianity became the empire's preferred religion under its first Christian emperor, Constantine. On the reverse of this, Argenta struck in Antioch under Constantius Chlorus. The tetrarchs are sacrificing to celebrate a victory against the Sarmatians. In spite of his failures, Diocletian's reforms fundamentally changed the structure of Roman imperial government and helped stabilize the empire economically and militarily, enabling the empire to remain essentially intact for another 100 years despite being near the brink of collapse in Diocletian's youth. Weakened by illness, Diocletian left the imperial office on the 1st of May 305, and became the first Roman emperor to voluntarily abdicate the position. John VI retired to a monastery in the 14th century. He lived out his retirement in his palace on the Dalmatian coast, tending to his vegetable gardens. His palace eventually became the core of the modern-day city of Split. The peaceful tetrarchy would effectively collapse with the death of Constantius Chlorus on the 25th of July, 306. Constantius's troops in Eboracum immediately proclaimed his son Constantine the Great as Augustus. In August 306, Gallerus promoted Severus to the position of Augustus. A revolt in Rome supported another claimant to the same title, Maxentius, son of Maximian, who was proclaimed Augustus on the 28th of October, 306. His election was supported by the Praetorian Guard and the Roman Senate. This left the empire with 5 rulers, 4 Augusti, Gallerus Constantine, Severus and Maxentius, and 1 Caesar, Maximinus. The year 307 saw the return of Maximian to the rank of Augustus alongside his son Maxentius, creating a total of 6 rulers of the empire. Gallerus and Severus campaigned against them in Italy. Severus was killed under command of Maxentius on the 16th of September, 307. The 2 Augusti of Italy also managed to ally themselves with Constantine by having Constantine marry Fausta, the daughter of Maximian and sister of Maxentius. At the end of 307, the empire had 4 Augusti, Maximian, Gallerus, Constantine and Maxentius, and a sole Caesar. In 311, Gallerus's Edict of Serdica officially put an end to the persecution of Christians, though the persecution continued in the territory of Maximinius until his death in 313. Constantine and his co-Augustus Licinius legalized Christianity definitively in 313 in the so-called Edict of Milan. In 317 Constantine and Licinius elevated 3 of the grandchildren of Constantius to Caesar, Constantine's eldest sons Crispus and Constantine II, and his nephew, Licinius's son Licinius II. Constantine defeated his brother-in-law in 324 and executed both him and his son. This unified the empire under his control as solely Augustus, with only his young sons as co-emperors. He raised his son Constantius II to Caesar in 324.324-363, Constantinian dynasty. Constantine and his sons. The empire under Constantine, 337, division of the Roman Empire among Caesars appointed by Constantine I, from west to east, the territories of Constantine II Constans, Dalmatius and Constantius I having executed his eldest son and Caesar Crispus in 326. Constantine also elevated his son Constans to Caesar in 333, as well as appointing his relatives Dalmatius and Hannibalianus to Caesar and King of Kings respectively. Constantine would rule until his death on the 22nd of May 337. On their father's death, an interregnum followed during which Constantine II Constantius II, and Constans eliminated most of the Constantinian dynasty in a struggle for power that ended with the elevation of the 3 brothers as co-Augusti in September 337. The empire was parted again among his 3 surviving sons. Constantine II was killed in conflict with his youngest brother in 340. Constans was himself killed in conflict with the rebel Augustus Magnentius on the 18th of January 350. Magnentius was at first opposed in the city of Rome by self-proclaimed Augustus Nepotius, a paternal first cousin of Constans. Nepotius was killed alongside his mother Europia. His other first cousin Constantia convinced Vetranio to proclaim himself Caesar in opposition to Magnentius. Vetranio served a brief term from the 1st of March to the 25th of December 350. He was then forced to abdicate by the legitimate Augustus Constantius. The usurper Magnentius would continue to rule the West